So the tile labeled A is clearly darker than the tile labeled B, right? Much darker. So it's so mind-bending and crazy, and I don't even believe it myself. They're the same gray. It's crazy, but they're the same gray. We're going to look at this illusion and some other illusions, and they're not just, a bit of fun, kind of mind-bending and crazy. These illusions have a serious impact on our ability to paint and draw. So my name's Kenzo, this is Love Life Drawing. The first illusion that I want to go through is actually a little bit more subtle, slightly less mind-bending, but I think this is the most important illusion. This is a top 3 problem when you're learning to draw or paint. This is massive. So what this one is there should be somewhere below me on the screen a strip of value going from really, really light to really, really dark. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another strip on top of it, a thinner one. And you'll see that it looks darker at one end and lighter at the other end. And it's quite a subtle thing, but it seems to just shift a little bit. But, and you may have guessed this, if I remove the backing, if I remove what's behind it, you can see it's just a uniform strip of grey. It looked darker against the light background and it looked lighter against the dark background. It's called simultaneous contrast. We exaggerate the contrast that we see between something and what is right next to it. And this is like top 3 struggles for someone learning to draw or learning to paint, is that exaggeration of the contrast. So I'll give you an example. You're trying to draw this figure and you're looking in this area here and you see that this little bit is a little bit lighter than the area around it. And so what we'll do is we'll draw it way lighter, we'll draw it quite a bit lighter than the area around it. And then over here, now we're drawing this bit, we see this bit is a little bit darker than the area around it. And because of this whole exaggeration of contrast, we'll draw it too dark. And sometimes that dark bit will become as dark or even darker than the bit that we draw too light over here. We're trying to describe to the person looking at our artwork this figure. And we're saying the light is coming from over here. And it's really important that we clarify that basically this area is quite light and this area is quite dark. And when we start zooming in and then exaggerating the contrasts, we mess up that basic message we're trying to get across to the viewer, and suddenly the feeling of form, the feeling of light breaks down because we have totally over-exaggerated the contrast. Also, we don't have a nice composition anymore because instead of this big shape of light and big shape of dark, nicely designed shapes, suddenly we have little patches of contrast that are attracting the eye into all different little details, and it's no longer an attractive image. So we mess up the feeling of form, we mess up the composition because of this simultaneous contrast, and it's such a subtle illusion, but it has this massive effect. I think it's the biggest if there's one illusion that we're going to talk about today that you come away thinking, I am going to address this, I'm not going to give in to this illusion anymore, it's that subtle one. Here's one way to fix it. You squint. When you squint, you do away with those little details, those little shifts in contrast, and you just start to see the bigger shapes. So you squint, you establish the big shapes that you see of light and dark, and then you make a deal with yourself, you know what, I might vary some of the light and dark within the dark shape, and I might vary, the values in the light areas, but I'm going to keep the darks in a dark range, and I'm going to keep the light areas in a light range, and they're not going to overlap. So my darkest bit of my light areas isn't going to be as dark as the lightest bit in my dark areas. I hope that makes sense. Basically, squint and keep the big shapes of light and dark. So back to the illusion with A and B. So what is going on here is it's actually our brains are very clever, and the illusionist here has kind of manipulated things to trick this mechanism in our brains, but usually it works really well and we need it. And what the mechanism is let's say you have an apple in direct light. So there's lots of light coming off that apple. It's getting hit with a lot of light and we can see it. It's bright. Then you put it in the shadow and now there's not much light coming from that apple into our eyes. So we don't want to think, our brains don't want us to think that that was a light apple and now it's a dark apple. We want it to see it as the same apple, but just being hit by a different amount of light. The lighting has changed. So what we see is a combination of the light source, hitting something, and then the nature of that thing. So it's the light color and brightness and stuff, and then the surface color, the actual object. And we want to be able to disentangle those two things so that we understand what an object is like regardless of the lighting. If it's an apple in shadow or an apple in light, our brains still want to understand that it's an apple. I guess it's important, as we're evolving, to be able to identify things regardless of the lighting. And so that's a really important mechanism, and you can kind of manipulate that with these illusions. It also happens with color constancy. So I'm just gonna show you this quickly, just so you know it's out there. Here is these two weird rods or whatever. There's the cross thing in the middle where they intersect. On one of them it's yellow, on one of them it's blue. Except it's not yellow and blue, they're the same grey. We're looking at the same colour. It just looks completely yellow on one and completely blue on the other. So this colour constancy thing is really fascinating. I think if you're starting out with painting, I don't think you need to worry about it so much. The much more important one is the value contrast. Just realizing that when you zoom into different areas, you will exaggerate how much lighter or how much darker something is compared to what's around it. And then you'll lose the big picture. And so what you want to do is squint and see big simple shapes of light and dark early, and then just keep on battling while you're painting, while you're drawing, to keep those big areas of light and dark and not overdo the little contrast within them. The color constancy stuff, I was surprised that my eyes were deceiving me, so I started to research more and more about color, and I thought I'd arrive at a conclusion that made sense. The rabbit hole was deep, and at the end I came to the conclusion there's no such thing as color outside of my own mind, and I started to question the nature of reality and my experience of it. Don't go down that rabbit hole. Just keep painting and just keep drawing. There should be another video up on the screen, and I'll see you guys next time.